Since 1945, our world has been completely reshaped by just a handful of key decisions. And that's what we're going to dive into in this explainer. These critical hinge moments, the forks in the road that really set the course for modern history.
So think about this. What if one single decision changed everything? We're going to look at history, but not like a textbook, you know? It's more like a series of choices, of moments, where if someone had zigged instead of zagged, we'd be living in a profoundly different world. It's a pretty fascinating way to understand how we got to right here, right now.
All right, so where do we start? We're going right back to the end of World War II. This was a moment of almost unimaginable destruction. But out of those ashes, there was also this incredible, deliberate effort to create something new, to build a world that would never, ever have to suffer through something like that again. This timeline, it's just wild to look at how quickly things were moving. In just a few years, on one hand, you've got these incredible institutions like the UN being born, all designed to keep the peace. But at the exact same time, you have events like the partition of India and the creation of Israel that, well, they set the stage for conflicts that are still playing out today. It was a time of immense hope, but also just incredible tension.
Okay, let's zoom in on one of the biggest pieces of this whole reconstruction puzzle, the Marshall Plan. And you've got to understand, this wasn't just some big charity program. Oh no, this was a stone-cold strategic move with massive geopolitical consequences.
So what was the game plan here? Well, the U.S. pumped a staggering $13 billion, and that's a 1940s money, mind you, into Western Europe. And the goal was really twofold. First, get those economies back on their feet to stop extremism from taking hold. And second, build a strong democratic alliance to act as a wall against Soviet influence. And wow, did that one decision pay off? The reality we live in, a prosperous democratic Western Europe allied with the U.S., that's a direct result. But let's play the what-if game for a second. Imagine a Europe that just collapses economically. You would have seen communist parties surge in popularity, and Soviet influence would have just spread across the continent. So the Marshall Plan, it didn't just rebuild cities, it literally built the foundation of the Cold War world. So you've got this brand new world order, right? Well, it was immediately thrown into the fire, the Cold War. And this wasn't just some political squabble. We're talking about a rivalry that pushed all of humanity right to the very edge of annihilation. 13 days. Just think about that. For 13 days in October of 1962, the entire world was basically holding its breath, teetering on the edge of nuclear war. This wasn't some far-off threat. It was real, and it was happening now. The US and the Soviet Union were eyeball to eyeball. And this was the moment it all got scarily real, the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is as close as the Cold War ever got to going hot, a direct nuclear showdown over Soviet missiles planted on an island just off the coast of Florida. So here's the breakdown of how it all went down. The Soviets sneak nuclear missiles into Cuba, right on America's doorstep. The U.S. responds by throwing a naval blockade, a quarantine they called it, around the island. And for those 13 days, it was just this insane standoff. Everyone was bracing for the worst. But what's really amazing is what was happening behind the scenes, these secret negotiations that ultimately pulled us back from the brink. This was a genuine fork in the road. The reality we got? Tense back-channel diplomacy that won out, and disaster was averted. Thank goodness. But that other path, it's just terrifying to think about. A full-on nuclear exchange. It would have been a global catastrophe, leaving huge parts of the world as radioactive wastelands. It's a powerful reminder that history is made by choices, not just by destiny. So the Cold War eventually fizzles out, right? But history hates a vacuum. With the Soviet Union gone, a whole new set of questions pops up. What happens now? Who's in charge? And what new conflicts are going to rush in to fill that void? And that brings us to the next chapter. New players, new rules. The fall of the Soviet Union basically reshuffled the entire deck. Suddenly you have unquestioned American dominance, a more unified Europe, and, the big one for the 21st century, the dramatic, unbelievable rise of China. And in 1989, we hit another one of those critical moments, this time in China. The country was at a crossroads. Democratic reform, or stick with authoritarian control. And the government's answer, delivered with tanks and troops, would define the future of not just China, but the entire world. For weeks, you had these massive student-led protests for democracy right in the heart of Beijing. The whole world was watching. Would China open up?
But the answer came in the form of a brutal, violent crackdown. It was an unmistakable signal. The party was staying in control no matter what. And that decision, that single event, set China on the path we see today, this unique model of authoritarian capitalism, a booming economy, but under absolute one-party rule. But again, what if? What if the protests had succeeded? We might be looking at a democratic China today, and a totally different, maybe less tense relationship with the West. It's a decision that's still sending shockwaves through global politics. All right, so as we roll into the 21st century, the game changes again. The challenges that pop up now, they're nothing like the Cold War. We're talking about totally new kinds of conflict, global crises that would test us in ways no one really saw coming. And one of the first new battlefields wasn't on land or sea, but in cyberspace. Cyber warfare became a real thing. The Stuxnet worm back in 2007, the one that hit Iran's nuclear program, that was a complete game changer. It proved you could cripple a nation's most vital infrastructure without firing a single bullet. But honestly, the biggest shockwave of this new century didn't come from a computer virus, but a biological one. A novel coronavirus that would literally bring the entire planet to a screeching halt. Millions of lives lost. The human cost was just staggering. But the pandemic did more than that. It exposed just how fragile our interconnected world really is. Suddenly, supply chains snapped, economies tanked, and you could see the cracks forming in our global systems. It was chaos, right? Economies were shut down, hospitals were overwhelmed. It was a mess. But, and this is the incredible part, it also triggered this unbelievable wave of innovation. The massive shift to remote work, and of course, developing effective vaccines in what felt like record time. It really showed what global science can do when it's pushed. You know, even with that incredible scientific collaboration, the initial response from world leaders was, well, it was slow. It was fragmented. And it makes you wonder, right? What if? What if everyone had worked together perfectly from day one, sharing data, sharing resources? It's tough to think about, but it's pretty clear that millions of lives could have been saved, and the economic fallout wouldn't have been nearly so bad. So, looking back at all these moments, these hinge points, it teaches us something incredibly powerful. History isn't some set path that was always meant to be. It's the sum of the choices we make. And that brings the question right back to us, here and now. As we face our own challenges, what's the critical choice we face today? What's our hinge moment? And what choice are we going to make?